Hello everybody, today we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations by completing the square. Okay, so a lot of people get freaked out about this. They think it's difficult. Okay. Um, we've been factoring to quadratic equations to solve them. And that works really great if you have really nice answers, integers, easy fractions, that sort of thing. Um, what do you do if it doesn't come out like that? Well, you can complete the square. You can still do the problem, you can still factor it, but you have to go through a little bit of a process in order to do that. So the best way to learn how to do completing the square is to just do a bunch of these. Okay, so let's start with this equation, x squared plus 4x minus 6. Your first thought would be, hey, let's factor it. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and try this. We put an x here and an x here. Our factors of 6 are 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. Well, 1 and 6 makes 5 and 7. That's not 4, so that one's out. 2 and 3 makes 5 and 1. That's not 4, so that's out. So, guess factoring's not going to work for this. Okay? So, let's do this. Let's get rid of this, since this is the number that's gumming up the whole project here. So we're going to get rid of it by moving it to the other side of the equation. We're going to get x squared plus 4x equals 6. Okay, now, how do I complete the square? Very simple process. You're going to take this number right here. Okay? You're going to take half of that number, and you're going to square it. So, half of 4 is 2. Squared is 4. And you're going to add that number to both sides. Now, it doesn't always come out to be the same as that. We got lucky this time. Make sure you add it to both sides because you got to keep your equation in balance. Okay? So, let's kind of lighten that up a bit. It's kind of in the way there. Okay. So, now, what do I get? I get x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 10. Okay, now, I have completed the square. What that means is this thing is now a perfect square. Okay, it's like 1 or 4 or 9 or whatever. I can square root it and I get a nice thing. So, I can also factor it. It's going to be x and x. I'm going to take the square root of that. Basically, I'm going to take the square root of this and the square root of this, so that's going to be 2. I'm going to take the sign from that. Okay, so that's factored. If I wanted to FOIL it to check, x times x is x squared. 2x and 2x makes 4x. 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, now another way to write this would be to write it as x plus 2 to the second power equals 10. Because that's what x plus 2 to the second power means, x plus 2 times x plus 2. Now, what do I do now? Well, I'm going to square root both sides of this thing. And I'm going to get x plus 2, because the square root cancels the square there, equals, now remember the square root of 10 has 2 solutions, plus or minus the square root of 10. And now I just subtract 2 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 10. And that is my answer. I have completed the square and solved it. Now, this is something I would have never, ever been able to factor and get an answer to. Okay? But I could factor it by completing the square. Okay, so let's look at this one. Now you might look at this and go, hey, this is pretty easy because I can factor this, okay? I can make 6 from 7, the factors of 7. I can go 7 and 1, and I can make that negative and positive, okay? Except for one thing. If you check your signs, which I always tell you to do on the last term, so x times x is x squared, and negative 7x and x makes negative 6x, but a positive times a negative is a negative, and that's positive. So this doesn't work, and there's no way for me to rearrange that, so that's out. Okay, I got to complete the square if I want to do this. So how am I going to do that? I'm getting rid of the 7 because the 7's a problem. Okay? That's what we do in math, is we eliminate problems. So now I've got this. Now I want to make this a perfect square, so I'm going to take this number right here, negative 6. I'm going to take half of it, and I'm going to square that. Okay, so half of negative 6 is negative 3. And I square that and I get 9. Now remember, if you get a negative here, you did it wrong. This is always going to be a positive number. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides of this bad boy. And I'm going to get x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 2. Okay, now I've made this be a perfect square, so I can factor it. Square root this, x and x, square root that, 3 and 3, take the sign from there, minus and minus, this will FOIL to be that. Okay? And now this can be rewritten as x minus 3 to the second power equals 2. I solve that by square rooting both sides here. And I get x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 2. And now that's easy to finish by just adding 3 to both sides. And I get x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 2. And I'm done. So 3 plus square root of 2 is one answer, 3 minus the square root of 2 is another answer. That's a little bit hard to read, so we're going to fix that. Plus or minus. There we go. Okay. Why don't you try this one? Pause the video and give this one a try, and then jump back on and see how you did. Okay. So 24 has a lot of factors. You might think, oh, I should be able to factor this thing. 1 and 24, well, that makes 25 and 23, so that one's not going to work. 2 and 12 will give me 10 and 14, so that's not going to work. 3 and 8 will give me 5 and 11, that's not going to work. And 4 and 6 will give me 10 and 2, so there's no way to factor this thing. None of these are going to work. So I'm going to get rid of the 24. X squared plus 6x is 24. Okay, again, I'm going to take this number here. I'm going to take half of it. I'm going to square that. That's going to be 3 squared, which is 9. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides. X squared plus 6x plus 9 is 33. Okay, I can factor this. Now, since I made this a perfect square, I'm going to square root this. I'm going to square root this. Take the sign from that. There you go. Also known as x plus 3 to the second power is 33. Okay, now I can square root this thing. And I'm going to get x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 33. And now I can subtract 3 from both sides. And I get x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 33. So, that's what you should have gotten. Hopefully you did. Okay, now what about this thing? This one's a little different because the x squared, the leading coefficient, has a coefficient that's not 1. So I need to deal with that. So the best way to do that is to just divide the entire equation by 2. Okay? So if I do that, I get x squared minus 1/2 x minus 1 equals 0, because 0 divided by 2 is still 0. Okay? Now, my factors of 1 are 1 and 1. I'm not going to get a half out of that, so I'm going to have to complete the square to solve this. I'm going to go ahead and add 1. And this is where the freak out begins. Because, oh my gosh, I've got a fraction in the middle. What am I going to do with that? Well, this is what I'm going to do with that. I'm going to take that number, negative 1/2, and I'm going to do just like I did with everything else. I'm going to take half of that, and I'm going to square it. Okay, so this is negative 1/4 squared is 1/16. And I'm going to add that to both sides here. Okay, so this is also known as 16/16 here. Okay, so this is going to be x squared minus 1/2 x plus 1/16 is going to equal 17/16. All right, this thing is a perfect square. So I can factor it. Now, this looks scary, but it's not going to be scary because I've shown you how to factor these perfect squares. You square root that, put it there and there. You square root that, that's 1/4. Put it here and here. You take the sign from that, and I factored it. And I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that as this. And now I can square root this. Okay, now be careful here. This is x minus 1/4 equals, now I square at the top and the bottom, so this is going to be plus or minus the square root of 17 over the square root of 16, which is just 4. And now I'm going to finish this up by adding 1/4 to both sides. And so I'm going to get x equals, now they're both over 4, so I can just do this. I can just go 1 plus or minus the square root of 17 over 4. Again, that's another one. You would never figure that out by trying to factor the original equation. Couldn't do it. Okay. Scary, but not so bad. All right, solve by completing the square. So this is kind of the same deal as the other one. All right, this is not going to factor. So what I'm going to do, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this 2, because I don't want to deal with that. Okay, so I've got 5x squared minus 20x equals 15. Now I take a look at this thing and I notice, hey, all these things are divisible by 5, so guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to divide both sides by 5 because that's going to make my life a lot easier. That's going to make this x squared minus 4x equals 3. Suddenly this is a whole lot easier to do. Now I'm going to go ahead and take this, negative 4. It's a nice sunny green here because I'm happy because I've made this a simple problem to solve. I'm going to take half of that and square it. So this is negative 2 squared, which is 4. And I'm going to add 4 to both sides here. Okay, so I get x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 7. Lucky number 7. Now, as I said, I made this a perfect square, which means I can factor it like so. Square root that goes here and here. Square root that goes here and here. Sine from that goes here and there. Okay, also known as x minus 2 squared equals 7. And of course, we want to square root both sides here. So x minus 2 equals plus or minus square root of 7. And then I just go ahead and add 2 to both sides. And I get x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 7. And I'm done. Now that took something that looked really hard and wasn't that bad. Okay. A deposit of $6,000 was put into a savings account that paid an annual interest rate of R% compounded yearly. After 2 years, the balance of the account was $6,933.75. Find the annual interest rate for the above deposit. So we got to think back. A ways ago, we had a formula for this. A equaled P times 1 plus R over N to the NT power. Okay, so we got a little review here. So remember, A was amount, P was principal, that was the amount of money we put in. Okay, R was the interest rate, N was the number of times we compounded, T was the time and the number of years. So it's compounded yearly, N is 1, so I can pretty much ignore N. Okay, P was my principal, that's 6,000. So we got 6,000 times 1 plus R over 1, which is just R, times 1 times T. T was 2 years. And that had to equal $6,933.75. Okay, how do I figure out r? Well, first thing I'm going to do is divide both sides by 6,000. Okay, so that cancels that right there, leaves me with 1 plus r squared on that side, and this, I get out my handy dandy TI 84 plus C Silver Edition graphing calculator, or a reasonable facsimile thereof, and I take 6,933.75, divide that by 6,000, and I get 1.155625. Okay. Now I can solve this by square rooting. Okay. So I'm going to get 1 plus r equals the square root of that. So we're going to go square root of answer is going to be 1.075. And then I'm going to go ahead and subtract 1 from both sides. And I get r equals 0.075, which means what? It means that r is 7.5%. That's my interest rate. And I'm done. Okay. Here's some for you to do. Use the most convenient way to solve the equation by factoring. There is multiple different kinds of ways to factor these. Okay, and get your answers. Some of them are easier than others. I want you to pause the video. I want you to try all these. Use all the methods that we've done in the last couple of classes. And then we'll come on and do the problems for you, and you can see how you did. Okay, so this one right here, that's definitely a difference of two perfect squares. So I'm going to go ahead and factor this like this. Okay, and then one of them is going to be minus and plus. That equals 0. And so that tells me that 2x minus 5 has to equal 0, or 2x plus 5 has to equal 0. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides here. 2x equals 5. On this one, I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides, so 2x equals negative 5. And then I divide by 2 on all these. So x is 5 halves. And over here, x is negative 5 halves. So that was not bad. Okay. So I used the fact that I used my difference of two perfect squares formula to solve the first one. Okay, what about this next one? Well, let's see. Both of these have an x in common, so I'm going to go ahead and factor out the x. And that's going to leave me with 3x minus 5 equals 0. Now I can use the zero product property. And that tells me that x has to equal 0, or 3x minus 5 has to equal 0. Okay, so this one's already done. This one I'm going to go ahead and add 5 to both sides, and then divide by 3. So x is either 0 or 5/3. I don't like that 0 right there, so we're going to clean that one up a bit. Okay. So one answer was super easy to find. The other one took a little bit more work. Still wasn't very difficult. Okay, what about this one? I think we can just factor this one. So let's see, x and x, factors of 12. 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Well, let's see, which one makes negative 4? How about a 2 and a 6? A negative 6 and a positive 2. And check the sign, a positive times a negative is a negative. So we factored this one. This one tells me that x plus 2 is 0, or x minus 6 is 0. And this tells me x would have to be negative 2. And this one tells me x would have to be positive 6. So we're done with that one. So the only method we haven't used yet is completing the square. And guess what? We're going to have to use it on this one. So, completing the square. If I try to factor it, I get 1 and 1. I can't make 8 out of that. So I'm going to get rid of the 1 because it's a problem. And just like the Mafia, we eliminate problems. Okay, so now I need to make this a perfect square. So I'm going to take half of 8 and I'm going to square that. So this is 4 squared, which is 16. So I'm going to go ahead and add 16 to both sides of this thing. So I get x squared plus 8x plus 16 equals 15. Now, this is a perfect square, so I can factor it. Square root that, square root that. Sign for that. Okay. Now I can rewrite this as x plus 4 squared is 15. Now we're going to go ahead and square root both sides. So x plus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 15. And then I simply subtract 4 from both sides. X is negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 15. And hopefully you got all 4 of those correct. Okay. So there's our assignment. I'll see you guys in class. Have a good evening.